So my name is Eric Szyjka, and my service site was Electric City Barn. And in homage to that, I have named my presentation ECB and TCB, as what I did there was indeed take care of business. I want to caution anyone for reading any further humor into my presentation. I think you all know I'm a very nuts and bolts guy, so if you hear something funny, it is entirely inferred. It is not implied in the slightest. So I believe I have talked almost to death about my early life. And many of you know I am from Alden, New York, which is in Western New York. I was baptized in buffalo sauce, as they say. And after that, I went to Rochester, New York to learn the intricacies of heat transfer and specific folding logistics, which is to say that I worked in laundry for several years while I obtained my degree, which was in mechanical engineering. After that, I went to work for Honda, who had also supplied me with a few internships over the course of my degree program. And I was a supplier parts quality engineer, which essentially meant that I got to visit a bunch of different plants, including several of the ones where we put the cars together and several of the ones where we manufactured parts through other manufacturers and troubleshoot what was wrong with the process to create some issue downstream. It was, at its best, very intricate problem-solving work that I found a great deal of satisfaction in. And at its worst, it was a monotonous slog where you were told to do things because you were told to do them, and the reasoning didn't really matter. Sometimes not even the bottom line mattered. It was just, you have to do this. So I think you can tell from the tone of my voice that wore thin. And the only thing that really kept me in the job pre-pandemic was the satisfaction I got from tracing down a problem, solving it, and occasionally having some positive impact for the ability of a line worker to assemble a part without having their wrists cramp up mid-shift. When the ability to travel to different suppliers disappeared, and when they started forcing us to do manual and typically not well planned out labor to supplement work shortages when the pandemic set in, I told them that I was going to give them 3 weeks because that was as little as I could justify wrapping up every project I had outstanding, and that I was done. I left the traditional engineering career because that was probably the best chance I was going to have at being happy with it, that hands-on work close to the actual parts. And I wanted to find something that was a bit more meaningful. I had managed to do that in my own time through volunteer work, but when the pandemic became an item and the volunteer work kind of dried up, it was immediately apparent to me what the imbalance in my life was, and I did what I could to correct it. And so that is why I came to AmeriCorps. Electric City Barn is the site where I have spent the past, well, goodness, it's 11 months now. 10 and a half, 11, somewhere in that interval. Electric City Barn was established in 2018. It is primarily a makerspace that is focused on affordability and inclusivity. There are other facets. We oversee more than a few projects in the area that require grant underwriting, or we have a performance space within our footprint. But primarily our interest is in serving as a base from which someone can learn to do one of a handful of different disciplines and to connect with other creatives who already practice these things. Not even just the hands-on skills associated with woodworking, metalworking, fiber arts, printmaking, but the soft skills that are associated with that. So how do you network so you can best sell your products? How do you set up some kind of a technical store so that you can sell these things without having to carry all of your goods to some show over in the nearest large city? The position that I was brought on to tackle was titled VISTA's Community Engagement Coordinator. And the two main items written into the VAD for that position were to oversee a volunteer program and to develop a community engagement strategy. And when I really sat down for the core work of that endeavor, I discovered that it was less possible than it seemed originally, and that if I were to do it, it wouldn't actually yield the positive results that it would in different circumstances. To explain that, I think that a lot of the original work that set into Electric City Barn gave it a good trajectory. But in the past few years since, many things have fallen through the cracks in the way of physical infrastructure within the building and in systems designed to allow people to engage more fully in the space and to set boundaries for how much space somebody could take up. And all of these things are important in maintaining a shared workspace that otherwise just becomes one person's workspace that other individuals are occasionally allowed into. And so the work that I actually did looked very different from what I expected it would be. I've included a few pictures, but I'm basically going to talk over the bullet points of the work's, the main subjects. What I tried to do was identify small incremental improvements that could build into the infrastructure of the place, work with skills that I possessed and that might be sustainable after I left by people just maintaining them. And when I could, to work with community members that were already involved to get these things done. First, in terms of their input, because they often had feedback that told me, we've tried this sort of thing before, that didn't work, here's why. And second, because if I am the only one putting in work on this, then it's only my project. And as soon as I leave, it's really up in the air if anybody cares about it. So the three pictures that you see on screen, going from the left one, then the top one, and then the bottom one, there was a systemic improvement we made to the wood shop. In the center picture, you see a whole bunch of tubes and barrels and bags. This is a dust collection system that is essential for functioning a wood shop in a small footprint. And the system that we had set up before didn't allow for more than one person to operate a tool that generated sawdust at a time. The improvements that we've made have made it so that somebody can operate more than one tool. Well, more than one person can operate more than one tool unless they have very long arms. And when the time finally comes every few weeks, emptying that barrel of sawdust is actually a much more simple procedure than it has been in the past, because you can pull it out without having to disconnect more than one component from the system. On the top, there was a donation that came to our attention, and their main intent was to purchase more advanced manufacturing technologies. So we decided to purchase several computer-controlled devices with that. And my expertise allowed me to research what was the best route to go with this donation, and then when the donations came in, to actually install them, despite what I believe we've all had experiences assembling IKEA and other knockdown furniture. Just think about that, but with a whole bunch of wires and mechanical components involved as well, because engineers are no better at writing those instructions than they are at IKEA furniture. And then lastly, I was able to take advantage of some technology that was already available on site, like a 3D printer that wasn't seeing use. And it wasn't seeing use because, first, we didn't have any systems designed where somebody could meaningfully interact with this device. We didn't have it written down how much our material cost. We didn't have it written down how to use the thing. So I ensured that it was physically set up properly. And then I went through and I figured out what the costs were in terms of material and time use. And I wrote those down so that we could present them to anyone who wants to use it as a member. And beyond that, I wrote a user guide that walks somebody through the core steps to get a file and print it on this device. Second page, just more of those small incremental improvements. I helped us put in a digital check-in process so that we can more easily go back and see what are our peak hours of usage. So if in the future we need to decide about staffing and we know, okay, Wednesday from 10 a.m. until 2 is usually pretty dead, but people always come in 2 o'clock through 8 o'clock. It's always incredibly busy. So that's where we need to work on staffing, as well as making it easier for people who regularly engage in the space to check in and get right to their project, as opposed to the paper and pen model that we had before, which, Rose, I think you've articulated this earlier in the day. I really don't like paper that you collect and then you just hold on to because you don't really know what to do with it. And that's exactly what we were doing with the sign-in sheets. I made a lumber bay from donated materials. And for those who don't do woodworking, this is a place where somebody can store all of their initial materials. So 8-foot lengths of pine timber that they bring in to work on a project that, previous to this being here, was either going to be piled in a corner somewhere, uncontrolled, unlabeled, and might have been used by somebody else in confusion. But now you can leave the things that you can label it as your own so that somebody knows this is somebody else's material. I'm not going to use it. And it makes the space more accessible for someone who doesn't have everyday transportation that could handle carrying in and carrying out those materials. So if you want to do a project and you don't have a truck, but your buddy has a truck, or you don't have a truck, but you can rent one from Home Depot, you only need to do that when you're bringing it in and when you're bringing the project out. You have all of that space in between that you don't need to worry about getting it in and out with the vehicle. The last one that I've listed here, I made it a plan to either build or find for free as a donation sturdy tables that could occupy the co-working space in the middle of the floor, because it was, previous to then, just sort of empty space that kind of affirmed a belief the community had about it being an empty and useless space. And now with these there's a place for people who do not have work within the defined disciplines already. So if you're not woodworking, but you need to sit down somewhere and plan something on your computer or draw something out, there are these tables in the middle. They also serve as something of a social space. And for every one of these projects, there was at least initial involvement in collecting materials with other people who are already involved in the community. And that's something I'm happy about, if not continued involvement from other members of the community, like in the shop improvements that were made. Now, how it's all turned out for me. Well, I was able to reconnect with a lot of skills that had kind of faded away in my last line of work and in the interim between that and AmeriCorps. I reaffirmed the importance within myself of listening to the stakeholders and experts, because if you do not do screen printing, you don't necessarily understand how to set up a shop for screen printing. So the only really way that you can do that is be a screen printer or engage with people who do. Same thing goes with every other discipline in our space, and the same thing goes with our space within the community. There's a continued conversation about where we can actually be useful, and it's not in the traditional ways that a maker space is. So you have to fight a lot of instincts from people who get gung-ho about new technology and only about new technology. I reaffirmed the importance of direct and clear communication, in particular with the first supervisor I had, because a lot of boundaries were crossed, and it was kind of because I didn't make it clear the boundaries were there. I was told to do some things that I did not want to do, but I had to tell them that after it was done, because that wasn't something I had articulated before. The same goes with every other arrangement or project that we've had. If you aren't communicating clearly, there's going to be a problem. And the last thing that I found an old skill was failure, because in previous work, I've found that I tend to lock in on figuring out the solution before I try doing any solution. And sometimes, in particular, when you're doing something fast-paced or something that you don't have an intellectual base to go from, that isn't the right way to take it. You have to try something, even if you know it might not work, to figure out why it doesn't work. And I know that I am inching up on my time, so just to really breeze through the rest of them, I did a lot of creative projects. I had a lot of fun. I'm sure I've cornered more than a few of you at social gatherings and shown you pictures of the weird things that I've done. And if you want to ask me about them, I encourage you to really think about that decision, but then to do it privately. And lastly, connecting with different viewpoints. Coming from a STEM background, I met a lot of people who were like me, or a lot of people who were so similar to me that they were basically me. And coming to the nonprofit world, working within a mixed income community, and then working with a very creative community has really opened up my ability to listen and try to understand what people are talking about, because it is almost never the first thing I think, and I have to intelligently ask questions to get to it. And this, the last part, I do have a job, and unsurprisingly, it is with Electric City Barn, because I do have great affection for the space. I will be their facility safety and maintenance coordinator, and I'll be in the area if you guys have any questions, want to connect. And if you want to learn to do something in shops, I'm always open to teaching that. Because when I'm not in AmeriCorps VISTA, I can teach people to do those things.